survive and thrive, you must adopt a product-driven mindset. And we're back for another episode of Product Driven. This is your host, Matt Watson. Excited to be joined today by Mark Eagle, who is a startup advisor, consultant, been a CTO, been around the startup game for a long time. We can all learn a lot from Mark today. Mark, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks, Matt. It's a pleasure always talking to you, and this is going to be fun.
You know, I think a good place to start here is, I think you and I both have a lot of interesting opinions about the challenges of engineering, the technical side of it, and a lot of people focus on that, but there's the whole other side of it, which is really sort of the CTO realm and even sales and product and the other startup side of this. And where do we start with that conundrum of problems that people seem to overlook and maybe don't quite value as much as the technical skills?
Yeah, that's a great question. And part of me says part of it's with these buzzwords and titles. So if you ask 5 people, you get 5 different opinions on what a CTO is. And so, that might be a good place to start because people don't even know what a CTO is.
Well, we were talking about this earlier, and at every small company, they need a salesperson, they need a marketing person, they need a software developer, but they need somebody to help with bookkeeping, but they don't need a CFO or, a head of marketing or a chief sales officer or necessarily a chief technology officer. They need people to tactically do the work, right? But a lot of companies will hire a software developer and they give them the job title of CTO, which later potentially causes issues if that person doesn't grow into that title, which was me at one time when I was 22 years old. But
yeah, and same with me. We didn't use those titles, so but I was doing those kind of jobs, and so my view of the world is I don't really care if I'm starting a company. I don't really care what I call these people. But I want to know, as an advisor, I want them to be true to what they're actually trying to hire. So usually within 5 years, I don't believe someone can be a CTO because in my definition of a CTO, C means chief, and the O is officer. So that's a C-level position. So with 5 years of experience, it's rare to find anyone in the business world that's going to be at the table in a C-level position. So in reality, you want a lead developer, that could grow into a manager of engineering or director of engineering as their next thing. But you want to build product. But you need someone, which is really important, to be able to guide that person along. There's things that you don't want to happen. You don't want to be creating tech debt without being intentional about it. You want to be aligned with the business. You want to be aligned with your sales team. And those are things that an engineering guy or certainly a lead developer isn't going to have those skill sets.
Well, I posted this the other day on social media. My formula for the startup CTO is it needs to be basically somebody who's good at software architecture and thinks like a product manager. And if you're a startup founder, you're the CTO, and you have both of those attributes, odds are you will be successful. Like if you have the product vision for what you're trying to build, and you can think like that sort of a product manager. It doesn't mean you're an expert at product management as a field, but you have a very strong product vision and you can make smart product decisions, and you know how to architect software. To me, those are the 2 components that I feel like are the most important for success.
Yes, and I agree with that. And I read that came through loud and clear in one of your last articles. And I thought I was kind of unique in that position because that was we talked about before of what my bias was on some of these, and it's because of my background. That's what I did. I mean, I was great at architecting software, and at the time I would even build it, but there was no product manager back then. There was no Scrum people. There was,
Yeah.
So
That was just part of our job 25 years ago.
exactly. And part
That's
of it's
part of what we did.
and part of it's ego that as engineers we thought we were the smartest business guy in the room and stuff, and we thought we knew all the customers. And so my goal was actually to be the smartest guy about the customers and the product and stuff, and the business. And that way, tying together those business needs and being able to architect software, I knew what it would take to build stuff. When I would be listening to customers, I would be already um, building my, there wasn't Jira and pull request systems at the time. I was already putting in my head which features they were telling me would be throw-ins that I knew engineers could be doing in a couple of days rather than a couple of months. And so I
Because
was
you're not
always
waiting
thinking
for
about that.
anybody to tell you what to do. You're
Yeah,
the one figuring out what needs to be done. But that part of software engineering seems like has been lost, right? Like, that was the goal of Agile originally, was to get, a better process so we would be attached to customer feedback, right? And quickly make decisions and iterate. But what got lost in Agile was actually the connection to the customer. It just turned into a bunch of processes.
yeah, and that's where it's interesting the definitions of the product manager and then the software engineer. And a great software engineer, well, if it's got that enough product management skills, and that doesn't mean they have to spend all day long in front of Microsoft Project. As a matter of fact,
Now,
I do my scheduling on the back of a brown paper bag still.
basic
And
roadmap.
so like in a startup particularly, but even as I got into big companies, I got rid of a lot of those product managers and stuff because they weren't doing anything. And now with AI tools, meeting notes can be taken, and there's a roadmap for to-do lists, and the tools will tell you what's ordering things next and stuff. So I find a really good product manager, and I worked for one startup where they hired all their product management people came from HP, and I was blown away because these people knew the business. They weren't people that were writing collateral material or stuff. They knew every it was a hardware startup. They knew every hardware manufacturer for storage that we were in the market. They knew the executive team. They knew the product. They knew their history. They knew their revenues, and those were real product managers. That's what I don't expect my engineers to do that. So, but when it comes to what the next roadmap is for some features, that's where I'm biased, and I always wanted to choose those and define those.
But I,
And
but I think one of the things that software engineering teams don't do enough, though, is to step back and actually have some strategy conversations, because it's really about trade-offs. Like, everybody has lots of ideas. You put all the ideas on the roadmap, which is fine, but somebody has to stop and stand back and say, well, which one of these are we actually going to do? And why are we going to do this one over that one? Right? Like, somebody has to stop and make those trade-offs at a higher level. Like, there has to be a strategy at a higher level.
yeah, and that's what I love doing, and that's what I do fractionally with some customers. And that's like an hour or two a week,
Yeah.
and no one values that. It's well, one, it's a niche that who does that, and two, how do you find that and stuff, and so. But yeah, that's key because if you get your good lead developer or your engineering manager in the room with your business guys, and you doing that job, I don't need to get them in the room because I've already interviewed them beforehand and talked with them and had lots of conversations with them, and have them start collaborating together. And then, as me listening, I can then put together the notes.
Somebody has to connect the dots,
That's right.
right? Like,
Exactly.
because the engineers are really smart, and they may look at the roadmap items and the backlog, which is like a whole nother topic. Not really, it's not the roadmap
Right.
of what needs to be done, and they'll say, okay, we can do this one next, we can do this one next, we can do this one next. But if they don't connect that to the business of like what's going to drive revenue, what's going to reduce churn, what's going to keep us in business, what matters to the customer, what drives outcomes, like if those dots are not connected, then they don't make the best decision. They don't make the best trade-offs, right? But to your point is like that only may take a couple hours a week of sitting down and be like, okay, what really matters here? What's going to move the needle? But a lot of companies really suck at doing that.
Yeah, and sometimes they have full-time people in those roles, and and they still don't, because that skill set's pretty unique. And that's where I learned a couple of things along the way. You know, Someone told me once, every key executive is in sales. Um, you know, and sales is a dirty word for engineers, but I'll put it in quotes. But it's knowing your customers. It's running. If you have P&L responsibility, then you have to start to put those things together. And so I always wanted my organizations where I would have full P&L. So I'd have the product side, I've had the sales side, I'd have, the customer service side, because they all have to work together. And usually there are fiefdoms. And where do they come together? They don't. And so just by understanding what the business is about, if it comes to picking features, I wanted to be able to do that, discussing strategy, working with the CEO, picking his brain because he should know the industry cold. And so that's where you can get the industry knowledge. And then he might not have the technical knowledge. And so speaking his language and being able to go from the business to the technical, or from the strategic to the tactical, and then speak those languages, which is why I've studied, some of the personality tests like Myers-Briggs and stuff, to be able to communicate to people in the language that they're, used to talking in. And
Well, sales is really critical, but even for all software engineers, it's about basic collaboration, right? Like a lot of software developers are not very good at talking to other people. Some of them will avoid other people at all costs. But it's about collaboration, which just requires communication, right? And even sales, well, let me back up. And that collaboration, a lot of it is listening, right? It's the job is to listen to each other, is to listen to customers, is to understand what do we need to build. The job is really listening. And the same thing with sales, right? If you're actually in a sales position, your job is to listen to the customer and figure out, what do I need to sell them? Like, how am I going to sell them this thing? Like, how do I understand their problem? And how do I qualify them? The job is listening. Like, sales is a listening job, but so is software engineering. It's a listening job, but people don't think about it that way.
No, it's interesting you say that, because I've never, I know in sales or customer service and those things, it's definitely listening, but I've never thought of it in terms of software engineering. But but what I have thought of and do a lot is bringing those engineers in the room and educating them so that they can start thinking about the right things,
Yeah.
not about the next little feature or
Hmm.
making it cooler or something, but having them understand it. And
Why are we doing this?
yeah, well, and I'd actually take some of the engineers that wanted to, which is not everyone, but out to a client to listen.
Yeah.
And I'll tell a quick story. I took an engineer out. It was a consulting firm actually, and we took an engineer out to listen to the customer, and the customer brought in his whole tech team, and we spent an hour and a half with them. And on the way back, the engineer said to me, I said to the engineer, "What do you think of the meeting?" And he goes, "Oh, it was phenomenal. They threw like 20 questions to me, and I answered them all, and like nailed it. It was phenomenal. Can we do this more often?" And I said, "No, we have a little difference of opinion. It was a disaster. Your goal was to listen and come back with say a roadmap for a year of consulting. And when I called them tomorrow, and which happened, is they said, Joe is great. He gave our engineers everything they need so that they can develop all the things that they answered all their questions, and they're going to be putting together a roadmap, and then we're going to hire people, and we're going to do all this kind of stuff." And so he just wasn't a consultant. He was an engineer. And that's
Yeah.
where, there are different skill sets. And consultants, if in a lot of consulting companies, you have to be listening because you have to be selling or you're going to be out of work. So that's the exact point you're making there with the software engineer. I try to engage them into understanding, to get excited about the customer. And so that's when the engineer will stay overnight to, if the customer's in a jam, or to get some features out, because now they've met the customer. They understand their needs. They understand the business problem they're solving. They understand that why the software isn't working is having an impact negatively on their business, or what they can do in the future to generate more revenue for the customer. And it's things that they haven't thought of, not because it hasn't been part of the job, and no one's encouraged them to do that kind of stuff. So
Well,
it's
when you stare at the code all day, you think that the product and the outcome of your job is the code, but it's not. It's the value that the end user gets from using the product.
Yeah, and it's a whole nother topic, but I think that's where those jobs are going to start to change, and they already are, because with with some of the more modern coding tools and AI and stuff, you're going to have to start to think more and be less rote.
Hey, I'm writing a book about this.
uh,
The product
uh,
driven book. There's a whole chapter dedicated to that.
and I think it's a bit scary because I don't think a lot of people disagree with me and they don't see it coming, but it's already here.
Yeah.
And so um, there's a lot of developers, and I don't think they're going to make it. Software engineers, they are different than developers, and they'll be fine, I think, for a while.
Yeah. The
But
ones that are actually engineers. And I posted this on social media the other day too. It's like you have software engineers that take requirements and they engineer the solution. And then you have people that talk to people that understand their problem and engineer the solution of like how to actually solve the business problem, right? Like they're the ones who are actually creating the requirements. And
yeah,
and that's the biggest shortage we have. Like not a lot of people are good at that.
right. And now they throw around all these titles, whether they call them data scientists or whatever, but it's that strategic piece where knowing enough about the business, knowing what data is available, and trying to figure out the insights on what's next for this business. What can we do with technology to drive the business to the next level, whether it's better customer service, more revenues, decrease expense. Decreasing expense is easy because you're just going to automate processes. But some of the other things are not as easy. And that's going to take that next level of software engineer. And
Yeah.
it's not technical architecture, it's almost business architecture
Yeah.
around the technology.
That's one of the things talked a lot about in the product driven book is the old way of doing software development was 100% based on the bottleneck of the engineer. Like the engineer is the slowest part and almost the most predictable of the slowness, right? It's like, okay, the product management team knows I can give them the requirements. I can meet with them in 3 days and I will figure it out a couple different things I need to figure out to keep them moving in 3 days from now. Like I can keep the machine moving, right? But if engineering speeds up dramatically, the rest of it doesn't know how, right? If you can 10x the speed of software engineering because of AI and all these tools, now the bottleneck moves to product decision making and all these other things that have to that go around the engineering part of it that used to be the bottleneck. If you take that bottleneck away, everything changes. Like all the roles blur. Everything's going to change.
Yeah, and that's kind of a parallel to where I was. I I learned how to code. I happened to be good at it and couldn't write any code any faster or any better. I had a mentality of zero defect coding where code just worked. I do all my own QA. I'd bet my QA team that they couldn't find anything wrong with my code, and I couldn't do it any faster or better. I mean, so I said I need to learn. I can't scale. So I
No.
started scaling. So I started training developers who could, scale what I could do, whether as good as I can. I had a couple that are actually better, but but scale that. And part of it was so I could do some of those other things that I found more interesting. Because for me, coding wasn't the thing. Building was good for me, but coding wasn't because I couldn't scale it. So by figuring out the product and what to build, and then moving on to that software architecture role, and not a heavy duty hard. There's different kinds of architecture, and again, it's how we define these words, but uh, business roadmap or what you're going to build what the intent of building the software is for, and doing it for the customers. And we were a SaaS company, so we were building it. Every hour we put in was our own money, so we needed to be very efficient at what we did. When I moved into consulting companies, you just build by the hour, and there was no importance to be efficient or fast, or if you had bugs, then you charge them to fix them and charge the QA team to review them and stuff. So we had to do things smartly, and knowing that we weren't going to be able to rewrite code and do all those kind of things. So we had to be sensitive of things. Now there wasn't even a term tech debt. So now I'm very conscious of that. And intentional tech debt is fine. Things that happen because things get out of date is fine. But sloppy code and doing things stupidly, that's not tech debt. You shouldn't be doing that in tech debt. And that's where in some of the stand-ups and stuff, um, not to do status reports, but to talk about things like we used to do a minute on coolest bug of the week that a QA tester found, and that that people laughed, and the developer wasn't embarrassed because people thought it was a really cool bug, and who would be able to figure that out, and so it um, took care of collaboration, and it
Yeah.
brought the team
Teamwork.
closer, which is which is really challenging because now it's interesting because with the remote work and people going back, back to the office, people are companies are having people come back to the office for the wrong reasons. Originally, he said it was to collaborate, but they're not collaborating anymore in the office as they were
Yeah.
when they were on Zoom. And so collaboration is critical. Apple built Complex and Google built complexes purposely for that. And yet now that people are coming back to the office, and it's because of trust, is in my opinion, and the whole, things are breaking down there. And so I think with the forces of AI and this going back to work or still being remote, and having that employer employee balance will be really interesting in the next 2 to 5 years, because there's going to be radical changes in how things are done, and that speaks to your shift of where the bottlenecks are. It's not
Yeah.
going to be in code development because you could people don't think it can, but AI will be able to whip out most of the code. So maybe not the last 5%, but for a while. But what
We
the
know the shift is
businesses.
coming.
What?
We're seeing the beginning of the shift already, right? We know that.
Yeah, I'm now more on the aggressive end that it's going to happen faster than people think because the tools are scary. Um, and but good, it's some different skills and people who can use AI and write real regular code will be
So I've got
in real
another
high.
analogy for you. I've got another analogy for you. It's a lot more like low code development or no code development. And so I actually went to AI and I asked it, what is the number one skill difference between a low code developer and your average full scale or full stack engineer? What did you think AI said? What is the number one skill difference?
Number one skill. I don't even want to guess.
It was product thinking. Because
Yeah, well, that's what.
most of the technical skills go away, right? Like now you're just focused on solving business problems.
Yeah, you faked me out by saying what I was thinking because I was thinking right along the line. Yeah, it's that when you can code that fast, it's it's building the prototype or thinking about what the product is or experimenting with the product. I tell
Hmm.
people in startups all the time, and I got fired from 2 advisory boards for this. Is you guys are writing, you're doing all these detailed stuff and picking colors and doing all this other stuff. I said, throw out a menu with 5 different options of functions on it and don't write any code behind any of them and put it out to your users and put analytics behind it and see what's clicked. And you can always have a nice splash screen that comes up and says, coming soon, put in your email address for first updates on this on this feature. And out of those 5 features that the engineers thought were the coolest things in the world, only 2 of them were ever clicked.
Yeah.
It's like, so you've just saved a ton of effort. Now with those things can be built faster, but it's being smart about what you're building and building the right things and thinking through the product. And you can do more A/B testing, and you can do a lot more quicker to get to some like real agile. I mean,
Yeah.
imagine, the agile's turned into a process, which is a joke because
Yeah.
it's supposed to be agile. And now you really need to be doing
Yes.
agile because the code can be generated really quick and they don't have to be prototypes. You can be whipping stuff around pretty quick. And,
Now
it's,
you know why I wrote a book about this.
so, but
Well, I really appreciate having you on the show today. Um, if somebody is listening and want to learn more about what you do or how to connect with you, what would you say?
Yeah, I tell people to go to my LinkedIn profile, which is, the standard thing, and there's Mark Eagle, and since I have like 15,000 connections, I come up right at the top. And so you can
Okay.
I put some of my podcasts on there. I put like my whole history on there. There's like a lot of information on there, and I'm always up for calls to help mentor people. I'd rather see startups get advice from people who know what they're doing than paying for advice from people who don't. And so I'm always happy to mentor or have a one-on-one conversation with someone for an hour. And I tell people I'm a New Jersey kid, and I tell it like it is. What you see is what you get. And then I get all my business because people trust that I know what I'm talking about, and I can help them add value to their company. So,
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today, Mark.
well, a pleasure, Matt. I look forward to you seeing your book.
All right. Thank you so much.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning into Product Driven today. If you're passionate about building user-centric tech products, join over 30,000 tech leaders who receive the Product Driven newsletter directly in their inbox every week. Visit fullscaleteam.com/newsletter to sign up today for our newsletter. You can also view all of our episodes on YouTube and join over 50,000 others. And please follow me, Matt Watson, on LinkedIn. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.